it was all driven by paranoia about the people you're after, who were Nazis, who wanted, who were terrorists. Like there were always, I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you do, during the Trump years, there was always some FBI warning about how terrorism, like MAGA terrorists, were about to, erupt here or there. And yet the left it drives and has always driven political violence in this country for the most part, not exclusively, but mostly. Anyway, so is that it's climate change. It's a perfect thing to talk about as well. It's not simply that they could say, hey, there's a deviation in temperature, we need to deal with it. It's that the apocalypse is coming, that it's going to end, that the world will be burning. You know what I mean? This is like paranoid. There's usually conspiracies involved. And that propelled almost the entire leftist view of the opposition.
Hello, culminators. Welcome to the program. It is a hot and steamy day in Newark, New Jersey. So I thought I would cool things down with the dulcet literary tones of David Harsanyi, who is someone who I have been reading for many, many years in various conservative political journals, and who I followed intermittently on Twitter. And the reason it was intermittent at the time, originally, David, it was because of this picture. Your old Twitter profile pic, which I found so off-putting. I couldn't get back, and I'm sure it made sense at the time, but I think you used that for a very long time.
So I used it because I noticed that a lot of columnists, they have their pictures and then they get older, but they still have kind of the young, picture of them, and it's kind of misleading. So I didn't want to mislead people. So I figured that would be one way to do it. But despite my best efforts, a lot of the newspapers I'm in, as a syndicated columnist, they use pictures from like 20 years ago when I'm a much younger man. There's nothing I can do about it. So I just gave in.
I saw a picture of you. Was there a big hairy beard picture of you of one time? I mean, you have a really unusual name.
No, I never had a beard. No,
it was never a beard. Okay. So
yeah.
So it turns out there's someone, and it could very well be that person was screaming about you or something that you wrote, and that's what
I have bearded people screaming at me all the time.
So David, you make a living as a writer.
I do.
Is that means that you must be doing something either terribly unethical or very right? How did this happen? Is this something that you wanted to do your whole life?
Yeah, I started out in sports writing, which I didn't enjoy as much as I thought I would. I think it's better as a hobby than a career for me. And then when I had children, working nights and weekends wasn't really doing it for me. And after 9/11, I became much more political. I mean, it's always been political, but I became much more interested in writing about it and saying something. So that kind of changed my trajectory. And then I ended up at the Denver Post writing kind of a metro column and a political column. But it's the only thing I've ever really done, and the only thing I think that I have some skill in the world to do.
You apparently, though, really annoyed some people in your Denver Post days, huh? Taxidermy was mentioned.
Yeah, when they were so this sort of put me on the map there. But when they were bringing wolves back, everyone was very excited about it. But I was not, as a New York kid, I was in Colorado as a New York kid, very excited about seeing wolves in my backyard and so on. So I proposed that we shoot any wolves we see, and this did not go over well. I didn't realize how excited people were about seeing them. I was not excited. The wildest animal I saw growing up was probably a squirrel or maybe a rat on the subway. So I was not used to that.
The subway. So did you grow up in the New York area?
Queens, and then we moved out to Long Island. So yes.
Queens, and then out to
yeah.
to the island.
to the island.
when things got when things got good. When you
Strong
moved.
Island, yeah, South Shore, you know. Yeah, my parents were immigrants, and I kind of experienced as a kid, I guess, the whole uh, coming here with not a lot and ending up in, firmly entrenched in the middle class and seeing the whole, meritocracy at work, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think that's pretty common for people such as yourself and myself who have immigrant parents that, and or the rough equivalent. It has been an interesting, I think, it's been an interesting time for, well, let me take a step back. Did you grow up in a family like I'm gonna say you grew up kind of in a family like mine, but was your family politically liberal like mine?
No,
They
my
were not.
no, my dad and mom defected from communist Hungary, so they had a my dad was a big fan of Reagan, for instance, and he was pretty conservative. Now, where I grew up, the neighborhoods and the temple I went to and the schools I went to were very, I'd say left wing and typically, as it were, in Jewish communities in New York, where we probably both grew up. And but my father, so we were outliers in a sense. He was very pro-capitalist, anti-communist, loved Reagan. We used to get the National Review when I was a kid, that sort of thing, and which is why it was always a dream to work there.
That must have
So
really
yeah,
been cool. I grew up on that stuff also. I'm a couple years older than you, but that was my mother's milk. I mean, my mother wasn't came from Cuba, so they were never particularly liberal. But on the other hand, they it was Poland via Cuba, so the Polish Jewish family they were Bundists,
wow,
they're social democrats, uh, and they didn't seem to get the idea that, I mean, they left. They knew to leave Cuba, but kind of like people leaving California, they don't always learn the lesson. All right, so that's the story. You start out in sports writing, which some of the great American writers took similar paths themselves. I'm not going to embarrass you by including you in that company,
I
uh,
appreciate that.
but you know, I think you're pretty great. In any event, you have found yourself very comfortably on the on the right of things.
Yeah,
It's been quite an adventure.
yeah. Um, I would say that perhaps I started out more libertarian than I am now, in general. Uh, I'm still, I would say, far more freedom focused, I guess, or individual liberty focused, or classical liberal, whatever you want to call it these days. I do not find common cause with big L libertarians almost ever, though we probably share many of the same, or maybe we do, but that's not what I consider myself. So I guess I'm a Reaganite basically. I mean, that's what I grew up with. And we talked about how we had National Review around and things like that, but it was talk radio that really did it for me. Rush Limbaugh was on. I mean, that was revolutionary. I think there was nowhere else. Like I was a kid, so I wasn't always. I knew like things what they were telling me in school wasn't exactly right. Wasn't sure why. And reading National Review as a kid, it's over your head most of the time. So it was Rush Limbaugh that sort of made it accessible and almost and exciting in a way, and really could coherently make these arguments in a very humorous way. And then later on I started reading PJ O'Rourke, who's my hero, and that was really that was the person who got me into writing,
You know, I
and yeah.
I I remember when I read Parliament of Whores.
Yeah,
So I grew up, not grew up, but I graduated from Mad Magazine to National Lampoon.
yeah,
So of course I was well acquainted with PJ O'Rourke's work, and he was so, when he wasn't in a stupor, he was so freaking good. And I had a weird experience where I bought a Parliament of Whores, which when I read it, I could not stop laughing. I just couldn't. I thought it was the funniest thing. And I don't know if it's me, but I thought it didn't age well. I tried to read it a couple of years ago again, and maybe so much of what he said is just stuff that we've gotten used to. I mean, you still can't take away from him his his gift for phraseology. He was amazing.
Yeah, it might not hold up. I mean, I think for me it holds up still somewhat, but it's not as exciting to read, and it might be because it's very topical to the early '90s.
Yeah,
Uh,
that could be.
yeah, I think Eat the Rich maybe holds up, and there are other books that really hold up well. Like even Give War a Chance probably doesn't hold up as well. But what I love about him is that he could be funny, and there was always this stigma about not stigma, I don't know, conservatives aren't that funny, they're too serious, this and that. But I think Buckley and PJ O'Rourke and many others dispelled that, and were a lot funnier than most writers. I mean, he could write for Rolling Stone, and
And did.
yeah, and did, and took over for Hunter Thompson, and I think he did. I think he was a far better writer than Hunter Thompson. But so anyway, yeah, I mean, he was a huge inspiration to me. As a writer. And I think a lot of people get into the business now are writers nominally, like they just want to be on TV or they want to be podcasters. There's nothing wrong with those things, but I think that we've lost a little of the craft, that a guy like him really exemplified.
No question.
Yeah.
No question. There are a few people who can really still put pen to paper, figuratively. Uh, I think social media has really taken a lot of the air out of the long form written word. I myself, who used to write, I mean, even when I was blogging, years and years ago, I wrote a number of books, either as a main author or as a collective or whatever the case may be. But I can't imagine. I know there are books in me. I can't spit them out. We can have that conversation privately sometime. But even when in the blogging days, 10, 15 years ago, I could sit down and write a really long, intricate blog post. And it is so hard to focus, to just to take the time and plus the payoff, especially on the payoff on social media. You're going to do better in a video. Because we're all children watching Saturday morning cartoons now. We need to have things in our face, and I'm doing effects and I'm doing GIFs.
Yeah, it's instant gratification to like dunk on someone with the perfect line, or whatever. So
right, but and as you know from following me on Twitter, I'm not good at resisting that temptation.
I know I have such. I mean, for me, the blogging age was the blogging age. Was the I'm sorry, blogging. When blogging broke, it was like the golden age for me because I mean, it kind of undermined and killed my job at a newspaper in a way, but it was just so incredible that all these voices were just unleashed. These people who had expertise on kind of micro focused on whatever they were talking about, and we had these great big debates going, and it was just amazing. And then social media kind of everything, I forgot how many, 142 characters or whatever it was, and then everyone had to speak like that. So it changed, kind of like made it more juvenile, kind of, right? I wish we still had both because I get the allure of Twitter myself. But so I love the blogging age, and I was sad to see it go. Many of those people became star writers and all of that themselves, but yeah, I think social media, just the temptation and the allure of being able to have a million people like something you wrote, a sentence you wrote, is just changed the dynamics of how we communicate. I'm against
really,
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I mean, having had, I mean, I was retweeted by Elon once because his girlfriend at the time wanted him to. Okay, I mean, but although it was right in his breadbasket. It was an article critic. It was an article saying he's right about the ADL.
Oh, right.
Um, So that got 35 million views. Okay. You know what? You It doesn't really do anything for you. Like it, the algorithm says, okay, fine, yeah, that's good. But I didn't gain 50,000 followers from it or anything
Right.
like that. It really doesn't stick, which is, in and of itself, there's something to be said for that. That the only thing that I really works is having really nice breasts and showing them off. And it's the showing them off part that I can't do it. My breasts are fine, but I won't go that way. I want to talk about um your most recent book, which I had actually intended to discuss with you a while ago, but life got in the way. You've written a few books. This is book number 6, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
The Rise of Blue Anon, How the Democrats Became a Party of Conspiracy Theorists. David Harsanyi delves into the mindset of people who think Republicans would usher in the Handmaid's Tale, and who compare Trump's Madison Square Garden to a pro-Nazi rally held here 8 decades earlier. Now, explain why we're not just clucking our tongues at what dumb things Democrats believe in. You're talking about a phenomenon that is easy to sort of take for granted at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reason I wrote the book was largely, or the idea came to me largely through the Russia collusion hoax, basically, which captured the entire left. You're talking about the entire media. You're talking about the entire political infrastructure, think tanks, intellectuals, schools. Like everyone was all in. Uh, and it was propelled by the idea that the president of the United States was an asset for a foreign country, which now when you take a step back and think about it is an insane thing to believe, especially with the lack of evidence that there was to make that to back that theory.
And we're
So
recording this a bit within the week when we're beginning to see some of the documentation of the creation of this myth by the government itself, which
yeah,
is which is
which
ironically a conspiracy.
yeah, I mean it is a massive scandal. One of the great scandals of American political history, even though it's probably not going to be recorded that way, where you have people who are given incredible amounts of power. The CIA director. So he comes out and he'll say something to the American people. When I was young, if the CIA director said something, you took it seriously. It's not to say he never lied, but it's to say that he wouldn't make something up about the world, right? That would essentially undo an election, because this was a soft coup. People always misuse the word coup, and I'm not saying it's a violent coup, but it's a soft coup when the intelligence agencies are trying to overturn an election.
Absolutely.
So this is what we
And
had.
or Congress,
Yeah.
which was very much part of the picture.
And, the one job and the job of the media, I mean, obviously they've always been biased, but this was different because either they were credulous to believe everything they were told, which means that they're the worst people to do the job, or they were in on it, which I believe most of them were. So if they're in on it, that's just a corruption. And I think that's why no one trusts anyone anymore now, and essentially created this vacuum where other conspiracy theories can thrive and there's no one to debunk them anymore. But it wasn't just that. I mean, it, the left could not a few years ago, and now I don't know, as well, I suppose, simply debate anymore. So we were talking about the blog era. There were debates between left and right all the time, but that ended at some point where you could just call whoever you're talking to homophobic, racist, things like that. You would say they were funded by big oil or big this or big that. So it was a shortcut or a circumvention of actual policy debate that no longer happened. You can't. So it was all driven by paranoia about the people you're after, who were Nazis, who were terrorists. Like there were always, I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you do, during the Trump years, there was always some FBI warning about how terrorism, like MAGA terrorists, were about to, erupt here or there. And yet the left it drives and has always driven political violence in this country for the most part, not exclusively, but mostly. Anyway, so it's climate change. It's a perfect thing to talk about as well. It's not simply that they could say, hey, there's a deviation in temperature. We need to deal with it. It's that the apocalypse is coming, that it's going to end, that the world will be burning. You know what I mean? This is like paranoid. There's usually conspiracies involved. And that propelled almost the entire leftist view of the opposition. Unfortunately, I'm not sure it's, I think it's spreading to other parts of the political world now. But at the time I wrote the book, it was the left, I think, that was just captured by this kind of thinking.
Well, we are going to talk about that, and of course it has. Why? How did we get so? All right. Before I ask you, how did we get so untethered? I guess the question is, there is a school of thought, and I don't happen to share it, but I do think there's merit to the thrust of it. You've been lied to all along. Cronkite was lying to you. Edward R. Murrow was lying to you. The Times was lying to you. Obviously, there's truth to that. But as you say, in the example of, Brennan, there was still sort of a ground. In other words, we're gonna finesse things. We're going to omit uncomfortable truths, but we don't think that we're going to invent stuff out of whole cloth. What do you think was change or caused the change?
I'm happy you mentioned, for instance, Cronkite. I mean, there was no golden age of journalism. I often see people on the right say that, and it's completely a myth. Cronkite, for instance, lied. He had this special on CBS about abortion that essentially created a slew of myths that were later used, back alley abortions, this and that were used by abortion activists for years. Obviously, it's gradual, right? There's a whole process. There's a whole there are institutions like journalism schools that pump out people now who don't believe that there is objective truth, essentially, and that's been going on for a long time. When I was, in kind of at a newspaper and straight journalism, I was always one of the only people who was a conservative. Now, again, I don't think that you can have media that isn't biased. Everyone has biases, from regional biases to religious biases to cultural. It's impossible you report from the prism of your world. The problem is that all the people have the same prism, and you're not bringing in people who might challenge them. So what happens is there's just group thinking that goes on, and it broke with Trump. I mean, that's the truth. Trump broke everyone. At some point, they decided that it was more important to stop Donald Trump than it was to tell the truth. That's what it is.
Yeah, I think it's funny when I asked the question, I didn't think this was the answer, but that was the tipping point. I think you got to say that was the tipping point.
Yeah. What always made me laugh, kind of, is that for me, from my perspective, we just talked about my ideology and so forth. Donald Trump is a pretty moderate president. For me, he's like a Rockefeller Republican almost.
And not only that, growing up in the New York area, of course, everyone knew who Donald Trump was. And no one ever talked about his being racist or anti-Semitic. The guy was a real estate developer. I would not blame anyone involved in commercial real estate for being an anti-Semite, but if you were an anti-Semite, you certainly would keep it to yourself, and you certainly wouldn't marry your daughter off to an Orthodox Jewish real estate developer, and keep her, welcome within your family. It just, like, the untruth of it all was so conspicuous. And you're right, the institutions had been compromised by the journalism schools, which, like all of academia, had become postmodern. What is truth? All that sort of thing. And and as a lawyer, I understand, like, my job frequently is to demolish narratives that seem entirely plausible. So, we can respect how that works, but what happened was we really lost the ability to in any way see when we're going to be satisfied that facts are facts. I mean, before we even come on to how the right wing and conservatives have become infected with this mind virus, we can talk about Israel. There are no facts that can satisfy people who have certain beliefs about Israel. There is no proof that is sufficient proof to dissuade them from the conspiracies that they believe. And yet we still feel that we can and must engage in dialogue because, after all, aren't we all reasonable people? That's a fallacy. We're not all reasonable people.
Yeah, that's really I've been thinking about that a lot. I'll throw out facts about 1948 or 1967. It doesn't really matter because they don't care. So what do you do? Who are you convincing? Who are you talking to? I think we need to continue to do those things. The problem is that
And the reason is because we're not talking to those people. We're talking to the overwhelmingly silent audience on the sidelines that, at least in social media, and other alternative media, are going to get some back and forth.
it reminds me of socialism or progressivism has a religious component. It's actually just a denomination that is plugged in when people lose their faith, I think. And so there's this moral component that you can debunk blind faith in something. And so, that's why we're going to try socialism again, or that's why, Israel is evil and colonialism is, the biggest, most nefarious thing that's ever happened in the world. My problem is these days, at least, is that we often lift people because there is no one we trust to debunk or to gatekeep, in essence. We lift up all kinds of characters who say things that make people feel good, or not feel good, but make them euphoric about something. They hate Israel. They want to hear someone say things that helps them. And then we lift them up. And then what do? You have to debate them, or you don't debate. I think, debating them might be a problem. I don't really know what the best way to go about it is. So the problem isn't that, like, Josh Hammer doesn't nail Dave Smith down. He does. I mean, he demolishes him, for anyone who actually knows facts. The problem is, why is Dave Smith being lifted up as someone who has knowledge about stuff when he's a complete ignoramus on this topic? That's the problem.
But the problem is, in the total free agent, zero cost of entry world of ideas, who are you to say he's an imbecile? He's just asking questions, and these are all, ironically, it is again a completely deconstructed enterprise, and we end up saying the only things that we really know to be true are like physical realities and mathematics, and let's forget what nonsense we are told people are actually trying to do to question the reality of whether 2 and 2 really equals 4. That's really fringe stuff, and it doesn't really worry me. But there's virtually, I mean, one of the big fallacies and problems that I think that we've had with public perception of and understanding of discourse has been, we reached the point that in this deconstruction process that nothing was true unless you had video of it. Now the video is not true either. And even though right now you could still kind of tell that the AI is a little bit, clunky, we're not that far at all from it being 100% perfect.
I don't know if you agree with this, but recently when Grok had all of the people kind of spamming it so that it would say all kinds of Hitlerian and Nazi things, actually made me somewhat less worried about AI, in the sense that obviously can be manipulated and perhaps people aren't really going to trust it. Like, I use it sometimes as just a really fast search engine. What's the GDP in 1950 of Israel, right? Or whatever. I don't really use it when, to give me sort of context or opinion. I know people do that, but because it can be manipulated, like Wikipedia, I don't trust, or whatever. I'm a little more skeptical. I actually think AI is going to have great, it's going to be great in the medical field and other places. I'm sure it's going to be a good technology. I'm not sure it's going to be as effective as a sort of propaganda tool, maybe, but I could be wrong. Obviously, things are going to get better. But
No, well, I actually think what's happened is that we've come full circle so that when people now will realize that just as photographs could and did lie to you, and just as words could and did lie to you, your totemic trust in video should now also be released. And let's go back to looking at other ways to decide what we're going to trust.
there was a similar sort of angst around Photoshop when it started and things like that.
Glad you didn't say the fax machine.
Yeah, the fax machine. Yeah, I mean, every time there's a new technology, people are nervous about it, and rightly so often. But the problem with that is obviously, and this isn't unique to me, as an opinion, but you never can stop it, right? We figure something out, we're going to use it. The thing to do is to try to make us use it in a constructive way, not an evil way.
But so as someone who has been free market oriented your whole life, uh, and with a libertarian orientation, we are. It's an awkward place to be, and that's why I appreciate your saying I'm really a Reaganite. It's free enterprise informed by free markets, and yes, there's a libertarian thrust to it. I mean, we our mother's milk was William F. Buckley. And he wasn't an entirely consistent philosopher either. He was a Catholic. He was a traditional conservative. He believed that, yes, free markets and free choices, but yes, on the other hand, there's a social structure. There's such a thing as decency. There's such a thing. We've reached the point where a lot of people on the right think, and again, social media has amplified this debate. And I've been involved in a lot of litigation over, deplatforming and cancel culture. And Elon Musk also, who turns out to be a little bit of a hypocrite after all on the free speech stuff, but who saved us in Deus Ex Machina level, as far as I'm concerned. But is everything, how do we who don't share common values? I mean, we do, you and I do mostly, but is it possible in the pluralistic society for us to ever rebuild that structure of shared values so that we can say some things are simply indecent? I mean, the fact that there's any question about whether what happened on October 7th was barbaric and unjustified, that there are millions of young people people in colleges who don't think that is mind-boggling. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, there are a few things there. The first I would say that
read all of David Harsanyi's books.
Yeah, read my books in order. I would argue this, and just the first thing you said about, capitalism essentially conflicting, I guess, with a social, our values in some way. What do we do? I assume you're meaning, limitations on it or trying to sort of coax it to do what you want or things like that. I think that an open market doesn't conflict with the traditional family or the traditional or social mores or morality or ethics in any way, really. I mean, individuals do, and sometimes companies do things that are wrong, for sure. But
I was actually getting at the free market, at the idea of laissez-faire, and not only in economics, but in sort of a hands-off concept of social order, a libertarian idea of, hey, if I want to take drugs, who are you to say? If I want to walk around naked, that's my choice. If I want to, have sleep with my dog, that's really not for you to say.
Well, unless the dog consents in writing, I don't think that's okay. So it's a difficult question, and it depends on what we're talking about. If there are limits for instance, walking around naked. I mean, we live in a community. We don't want to see that. I don't want my kids to see that. So we make laws about that. I completely understand that. What we ingest in our bodies, I don't know. It depends, I guess, from my point of view. Um, I see what's happened
The
with
big it depends.
the legalization of pot, for instance. I mean, it's obviously worked in ways that I don't think have been helpful for a lot of communities and cities. So I haven't completely changed my mind on that, but I'm wrestling with that a bit because I think also the war on drugs was not working out. So I don't know how you go. But the key, I think the central question you're asking here is like we used to debate about a lot of things, but we had kind of a shared number of values, free speech, a sort of moral conception of the world and our place in it, an idealistic conception about being an American, for instance. That's pretty much go. So when Gore Vidal was debating Buckley, I hate to keep going back to this, they both in the end claimed to want the same things for the United States. Like Gore Vidal wrote books about Aaron Burr and the United. But now you have Columbia teaching people to hate America. What do you do about that? I don't know. Is the answer because there? I think the problem is like assimilation. Let's talk about that for a minute. So you bring in a lot of people from other countries. My parents are immigrants. I'm pro-immigrant, but I want immigrants to assimilate. Not only do we not assimilate new immigrants, but we literally teach them to hate this country often. I mean, if they're going to an Ivy League school, they're going to Columbia, they will think the worst of this country. They'll come out thinking the worst of this country. That's not sustainable. You can't have people in this country who don't want it to exist in the same way. The Constitution's only as good as the people. If people do, like everyone says this too, Soviet Union had a constitution. If people ignore it, if the leaders ignore it, if no one cares, there's only one institution today, I think, that upholds the Constitution. It's the Supreme Court. It's the only working institution we have, essentially. And how long is that going to go on? As soon as that's over, what happens? It's a free for all, right? Lawyers, like. I saw a poll about lawyer. I mean, these progressives have taken over law schools. Progressives have taken over religious institutions and destroyed them. They've taken over all kinds of institutions. They've marched through them, and so I think Trump's done a good job in certain ways. I'm kind of pulling that back as far as the federal government goes. I'm not sure though how that looks in the long term because every other institution is still captured, basically. I mean, so I'm worried about that.
If it's not captured, it doesn't have credibility. We now have a situation where when you and I are recording this in the middle of July, conservatives, libertarians, MAGA, whoever you want to call it, are, with a few exceptions, many of whom are Jewish, which doesn't help, obsessed with this idea that the key to government legitimacy is something called releasing something called the Epstein files. And this is, if you had wanted to design a Democratic Party op to fracture the MAGA coalition, and many attempts have been made along those lines, and Russia and Ukraine and Israel has been a very, very successful one. But then leveraging Israel with this Epstein stuff, it's really been something to see. And people who were friends are now, if you don't have my view of what, as a policy matter and an administrative governing matter, we should do with this unusual and sordid crime, you are a criminal yourself. It's insane. We don't trust anyone. We don't trust the FBI. And the FBI, to some extent, has put itself in a position of not being trusted because they said we're going to do X and we didn't do X. Thoughts with the understanding that by the time this airs, the other shoe might have dropped. But I mean, we have the Q and the blue Anon world seems to have found itself very comfortable in MAGA.
Well, I mean, in some sense, certain people in the Trump administration brought this on themselves, right? I mean, you start talking about lists, you start talking about, all this sordid stuff and how it's being hidden, and then then you realize maybe there's not anything there. No, they are there, and there's nothing really to release. I mean, that whole influencer press conference thing with the binders was just disastrous. I'm not sure why. I mean, in the old days, someone who does something like that, an attorney general, probably doesn't keep their job. I mean, it was embarrassing. The people showed up. I don't want to bash people by name, but many of them, I mean, these are not people who you should be lifting up to serious roles in investigatory. Even if you had a file to give them, you should not give it to them. It's like the JFK file. We were told this and that. We're going to see. I mean, basically, there's nothing there because in the end, I think the CIA is probably hiding its own incompetence in the past. But we know what happened there. With Epstein, it's a little more opaque, I guess. But obviously, there's factions here. I say release it, whatever. I mean, people don't realize that when you read a file, it's not. I mean, you know this. It's not cut and dry. Like they add theories in there. They just dictate, they put down dictation for what people say. Doesn't mean it's a fact. It's an investigation. You're looking at things, you're theorizing. But people are going to take every little crumb they see and blow it up. Anyway, but among those people who want this released are people who are monomaniacally obsessed with Israel. And they've cobbled together this theory that isn't based on any kind of facts, honestly.
No,
That
it is.
that it reminds me of the Russia collusion hoax. A foreign government's controlling the United States. We have this thing here, and this one was the daughter of him, and whatever else. This one person, we have this hearsay that one person said this, and you cobble it together, and Tucker Carlson knows for sure that he was an Israeli intel agent. All right. I mean, I would just tell people that the former prime minister of Israel, is not typically going to hang out with its super secret asset that it placed in the United States. I mean, it's a very stupid way to think. I don't know what's in that file, but either does Tucker Carlson or anyone else. And it's a shame that a lot of these people that I sort of respected still have jumped on this bandwagon. I don't know if they believe it or it's just kind of audience, they want to upset their audience. I don't know what it is, but it might tear MAGA apart. I doubt it though. In the long run, we'll see.
David, I'm really glad we had this little chat. People always say when you're on a podcast, where can people find you? I always know where to find you. Are you most active at the Washington Examiner now? Is that your main gig?
Yeah, I'm a senior writer there, and occasionally I write for some others like commentary. But that's where you can find me. You find me on Twitter, unfortunately.
Right, by reason of our many sins.
That's right.
It is what it is. I mean, it's done wonders. It's done wonders for my career and my life. But my hands will never be normal again. I mean,
it's the best way to reach a lot of people really quickly and
to connect with people that you in a million years might never get the chance to connect with.
I mean, unfortunately, there's just a ton of anti-Semitism there now, and it's just a little overwhelming sometimes. I still prefer it to the banning of voices that you don't like because I can block them, but some days it's really ugly out there. But
I mean, I also think they should stop pretending to have content guidelines when they don't.
Yeah,
you can have an explicitly neo-Nazi account on Twitter, and you report it. Why am I reporting it, Ron? Why do you? Because there are rules, and I entered into this community on the condition that rules would be enforced. They're not. So then just tell me you don't have rules. And but then just realize you're going to be Gab, and we're on our way to it. Unfortunately, being Gab. Maybe a new broom will sweep clean. I think right now Elon is concentrating on other stuff.
I think the monetizing the accounts has backfired. I think it incentivizes people to say really ugly things to generate some kind of reaction. I mean, if I were trying to fix it, I would get rid of that, and then I would also maybe make everyone give me a legitimate, verifiable phone number to join, and that way you don't have people who there's, as you say, there's zero price entry to go in there and just say the worst things. And this way we would know if there's, like, you saw in China, they'll have like the computer with 800 accounts going, and the guy, bombing accounts. I think that you could clean that up. You know, it's not impossible.
And not to mention, of course,
Excuse me.
Pakistan. I mean, these
Yeah.
guys. Oh, I mean, speaking of X, look, look who just hit 100,000. You're now really a respectable person.
Is that the number, the influencer number?
Whatever it is, it's never,
My friend Molly Hemingway has like 1.7 million followers, so got to pick up my
and I,
game. Yeah,
I've been one for many. And, by the way, excuse her for not following me back. It's fine. Her husband follows me. If I need to get something over to her, because people sometimes say to me, why do you follow so few people? You know the answer to this. Because at a certain point, it's meaningless. I want to. It's not respectful to you to just follow. Yeah, have you ever people begging you to follow them back? Like, why? What do you think it's going to get you? Well, it makes it. Listen. Everybody wants to be noticed. David, thanks for noticing my request to join us on ColemanNation,
of course.
and looking forward to chatting again sometime soon.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Good conversation.
Thank you.